Yeah. So we are doing Alumni Chizuk Take Two. Yeah, for those who were around for the last one. In the last time we got together, we were noticing that there was a virus running around the world. And as far as I know, it's pretty much still here. And we're trying to understand a little bit sort of how it is that we can put the experience that we're all having now in the context of our preparation for Pesach. Okay. So what we spoke about last time was in terms of trying to get some kind of a sense of how our present situation is meaningful in our present context. We spoke a little bit about the fact that we were really, last week we were not in Nisan. Last week we were still in Adar, and we were looking forward to the arrival of Parshas Chodesh. And we talked about what the difference is between Nisan and Adar, that Nisan is really, it's really the month of Pesach. It's the month of the Nisim, of the miracles, of springtime, of the blossoming, everything opening up, and the birth of the Jewish people in that context. The sort of the creation of a new relationship with time that's really unique to the Jewish people in terms of the way that we relate to reality. It's a more direct experience of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But last week we were still in Adar, and we talked about the fact that Adar is really the month that is as far away from Nisan as you can get, and really, in a certain sense, that sort of expansiveness which characterizes Nisan is about as far away as you can get when you're in Adar. And the question is, how do you get from Adar to Nisan? How do you get back to sort of recreating that and re-energizing that unique Kol Yisrael relationship to reality? Well, we spoke about a little bit. We spoke about a number of things, but in terms of relating to our experiences now as we're dealing with this virus, is that sort of the window in the darkness of a reality that's experienced as a much more physical place. The real window on a spiritual reality and a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is the window of the person who's standing in front of you, being able to look into their eyes and see that Tzelem Elokim, see something that's divine, see something that's beyond that sort of base humanity that we might share with the animal kingdom. See beyond that to the fact that there's really a certain divine element in a human being, and be able to embrace that. Talked about the fact that the challenges of being sort of stuck. I mean, is everybody in lockdown? Is anybody not in lockdown at this point? I mean, on one level or another, pretty much I think everybody is stuck in their houses. Lot less opportunity to be meeting up with other people, but also sort of to get away from people. But what it's that's the challenge of being sort of much more focused in these relationships with people also is the opportunity, as every challenge is, meaning it's a time to really cherish those moments with the people that you find yourself with. And that's that was very much what the Purim story was about. We look at Amalek and Haman as someone who the Chazal really recognizes someone who's very much cut off from that and unable to look at a human being as more than just the physical thing in front of him. And that really the tikkun, the answer for Amalek is really to embrace and grasp that more. That's what we talked about last time. And there's I think that really does touch on an essential element of what this whole experience is about. But now we're a week later, and everybody's stuck in the same place that they were last week, an additional week, and we're probably all looking to being in that situation for a fairly extended period of time. And it is true that every challenge is an opportunity, but sometimes as that challenge tends to lengthen out, the challengistic aspect of it may begin to become more apparent to us than the opportunistic aspect of it. And I did get some emails from people that were sort of talking about, like what, it's maybe not so easy to feel the sense of freedom that Pesach is really supposed to be about, and how are we supposed to understand this whole situation that we find ourselves in. We're separated depending on who you're with. Emir Hashem, my bracha is that you should like the people that you're with, and if not, then learn to like the people that you're with. But again, depending on who you may be with, family, you may be with your husband, you may be with your children, you may be with friends, you may be with roommates, really depending on whatever it is, you're still cut off from a much larger social context than you're used to. And that can give a person a real sense of isolation. And you may know people that are quite sick from this thing also, and we become more aware of the suffering of people that are around us. Again, I bless you that you should not have that in your immediate circle at all. But there's refuah shlema for anyone that is sick. We knew some people in the States that Baruch Hashem were quite sick, and thank God are better now. But and also if you're working with a klal at all, then you're aware of not only the suffering that's in your own immediate sphere, but in the larger community as a whole. And as the time goes on, there can be increased suffering, any pressure that people are feeling from parnasa, something that's only increasing with the passage of time. So with all this going on, it's like it can be a little bit difficult to get into the holiday spirit, but also just as we anticipate, in all likelihood, certainly in America and in England, this thing is going to stretch through the Chag almost certainly. So, like, what do we do with Zman Cherusein is the time of our freedom? We feel like really boxed in. So, like, how are we supposed to relate to that? And just in general, I mean, it's like life is full of challenges. There's no question about that. But we seem to find ourselves, on a world level and a community level where things are reaching like a different order of magnitude. Instead of having my life and having the challenges occasionally come up in the context of that life, the context of life itself feels more like it's becoming a challenge now with everything that's going on around us. How does that affect my awareness of my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu? How are we supposed to put this whole thing together? So I want to talk a little bit about these topics. Again, this is not exactly a Pesach shir in the sense of that you're not going to get any vortlach to tell over to your kids or your nephews at the Seder table, but it's just for us to sort of expand our own awareness of what's going on, to put these events in the context of when they're occurring to us, which is just such an important part of the Torah. Nothing happens by chance, and nothing happens at a specific time by chance. What exactly is the connection to Pesach and all that? Okay. So I want to start with the first question, which is, how are you supposed to talk about yourself as free? How do we relate to this Zman Cherusein, this time of freedom, when we are pretty much, we're really locked up inside of our houses? And I think the key to that is realizing that the halacha is afilu anisha b'Yisrael. That we lean in order to indicate our freedom. The men do that. The women have the minhag not to do it that way. That's not our discussions this evening. But even though the men have this obligation to lean, halacha is even an ani b'Yisrael, even the poorest person in Klal Yisrael has the obligation to lean and show themselves as free men. And really what you see from that is that the freedom that the Torah is really interested in is something that goes beyond the details of our immediate experience. And really the freedom that the Torah is interested in has to do with the fact that we have the capability of identifying ourselves with, well, first of all, with something more than just physical beings, but also maybe on a deeper level, just understand that we have the capability of truly identifying ourselves with who and what we really are, what it really is to be human. And people, a nation, the Jewish people, a people with a purpose in life, that our understanding of ourselves. The Mefarshim speak about the fact that Kadosh Baruch Hu takes us out of Egypt and we never go back to Egypt. We can go back to slavery, but not the kind of slavery we had in Egypt. And the essential difference between the two is exactly this point, that we were given the ability to penetrate to a deeper part of ourselves and identify ourselves personally with that, which gives a much deeper context and experience and meaning to our humanity. That it's kind of a funny thing when you think about it. Like we're celebrating the fact that we became free men. In the sense that we were slaves to Paro and we got out of that. But we spoke last week about the fact that the essential event that took place in Pesach was the fact that we identified Kadosh Baruch Hu as our king, which means essentially we move from the slavery to Paro to the slavery of Kadosh Baruch Hu, which obviously raises the question, what does it mean that we're talking about Zman Chevrusenu, and what did we even gain in that? The answer, I think, comes from the famous Jewish sage, Bob Zimmerman, also known as Bob Dylan, right? Who had a song that's, I mean, obviously I can bring you earlier sources if you like, but I think he put it nicely when he said that everybody's got to serve something. Everybody serves something, meaning that in his words, it can be the devil, it can be the Lord, but you got to serve something. And what he's saying by that is the fact that there's something we all strive to achieve and connect ourselves to. They can be physical pleasures, they can be something much, much deeper and much more profound, but everybody's striving for something outside of themselves to connect or absorb that into themselves. Everybody's running after something. And the question is, that's and effectively, it's the most accurate language that is, we all have a king. We have something above us, beyond us, that we're trying to connect ourselves to. And the question is that thing that we're connecting to ourselves to, are we becoming more ourselves in the process of attaching ourselves to it, or are we losing ourselves in that? And the freedom of Pesach is the freedom to truly be ourselves. The freedom of Pesach is to accept and recognize the Kadosh Baruch Hu as the king, which means that as I develop that connection, I'm developing myself around that, which also means I'm developing myself in the context of my Tzelem Elokim, the deepest part of myself, my humanity. And that this is a slavery, if you want to call that. Service is maybe a better, more comfortable word for us. This is a service through which we actually come into our own and become ourselves. And that's really what we're celebrating, is the fact that we were able to break out of a goal or a system of values or an enslavement that really took us away from who we really are and made us much more superficial human beings, took us away from an ability to experience life as meaningful in a meaningful sense of the word. That's the freedom we're really celebrating on Pesach, and that is a freedom that no matter what our circumstances are, no matter what our physical circumstances are, this is something that never goes away. And that's really one of the essential aspects of Pesach that that we're interested in really engaging during the course of the Chag, which is really an understanding of who am I, what does it really mean to leave Mitzrayim. What it means is to embrace Kadosh Baruch Hu as my king, meaning he's the goal, he's the one that I'm building my life around. And in doing that, what I'm doing is I'm deepening myself and I'm becoming more human, I'm becoming more myself through that process, no matter what the circumstances are. That's something that we're always able to do. That's something that can never be taken away from us. So, yeah, I mean, it's like we've been under much more extreme circumstances than the ones we find ourselves in now. I don't mean to belittle the fact that some people are obviously experiencing intense suffering in the present circumstances, but relative to what we've seen even in our not so distant history, we know that we can be under extraordinary pressures. And one of the most amazing things that comes out of anyone who's really studied the Holocaust or taken time to go to Poland and understand what was going on there is the fact that people had the capability of genuinely being themselves, being what it means to be a Jew in these most extreme of circumstances. That's the freedom of Pesach. That the fact that we have the capability of doing that, of identifying with that and deepening our identification with that, that's the freedom of Pesach. In other words, the freedom is not radical freedom to do whatever I want. It's the freedom to actually be who and what I am. Okay, that's I think that's that first question. But I want to get onto the other question, which is, how are we supposed to deal with the fact that we are in a context. There's no question that this is time of din, right? You see that the many people have lost their parnasa, and many people within Klal Yisrael have lost their parnasa, and there are people that are sick, and there are going to be more people that are going to be sick, and there's a lot of things going on in the world that people are going to be suffering from now and for some time to come afterwards, and that's called Midas Hadin. We are in a time when, relative to what we've seen for the last couple of decades, there's no question that the world is in that, but certainly Klal Yisrael within the context of that is a time when there's din taking place. It's important to recognize this other point that I mentioned before, that is it is, relatively speaking, a very, very soft din. And again, not to minimize the individual suffering of there's certain people, they're definitely individuals who are undergoing extreme suffering in this context. But overall, on a national level, this is a very soft din, but it is still very much din, which is something that we don't relate to so naturally. It's not so easy for us. We emphasize that Ramchal, because God created the world because he wants to give good. And it's much easier to relate to these things and embrace the Torah when things are good and when things are comfortable and when things are going well. But Akash Baruch created the world, which means that everything that's happening in the world is coming from him. We have, what is this Midas Adin thing? Why are we going through these periods of time, and how are we supposed to understand that? Truth is, the Seder is an excellent guide to this. So we have three principal things that we're focusing on during the Seder. We talk about the Pesach, the Korban Pesach, the matzah. We have the matzah, and we have the maror. The focus of our Seder, for the most part, is the matzah, because we're not. Again, we have 2 weeks. You never know what's going to happen between then and now. But certainly, for the last several thousand years, Korban Pesach has not been a bolate. It hasn't been an actualized aspect of the Seder. Really, the focus is very, very much on the matzah, and rightfully so. What's the matzah all about? So that's pretty clear. The matzah is stuff that you bake very quickly. We didn't have time. We were rushing out of Mitzrayim. The matzah, really, when you look at that matzah, what you're supposed to see is the actual freedom and departure from Egypt. That's what it represents. The Maharal talks about the fact that it's kind of the fact that you have to make it so quickly is the bread itself is it's like bread that doesn't have time in it at all. In the same way that the Jews went rushing, the chipazon, they went rushing out of Egypt. The chametz also is the bread without the chametz really represents. The word matzah in Hebrew actually means pure and unadulterated. And the matzah is kind of like bread without any attributes foreign to what it is itself. That idea that we were talking about before, what it means to be a free man is to be able to be yourself. So the matzah really is symbolic of that idea of it is bread with nothing attached to it, including chametz. There's nothing attached to it that isn't bread in its most essential form. And in a certain sense, we look at the matzah as essential bread. And in being essential bread, it really symbolizes the idea of becoming free and getting out of Egypt. It's cheres, it's getting out. The maror is actually not such an easy thing to relate to. It's a question. The maror is actually a question. The Maharal has a big question in the maror, which is that, why are we eating the maror? Everybody knows the answer to that. We're eating the maror because it's on some level symbolizing the slavery, the pain of the slavery. We're supposed to eat that maror, and in tasting its bitterness, it's supposed to remind us of the bitterness of the experience of the slavery. And the Maharal asks an obvious question, which is, this is a Yom Tov, right? We have an obligation of simcha. What is the maror doing at the Seder? The obvious answer that's so often given is because through contrast, you can actually appreciate what you get. But the reality is that if that was the only reason it was there, it would be very difficult to, you would basically be saying that the maror is there to serve the appreciation of the matzah. And if that's true, then why is the matzah a mitzvah d'oraisa and the maror also is a mitzvah d'oraisa? They're really not equal according to this explanation. Furthermore, what you're really interested in is that contrast that gives you the appreciation. You actually have it in the matzah itself, because the matzah itself is called lechem oni. It's not so much we're going to talk about this evening. If you want more, we can talk about that another time. But the matzah has a dimension to it of lechem oni, the bread of affliction, the bread of poverty. It reminds us of what we didn't have and the suffering we had in Egypt, as well as being symbolic of that freedom, and it provides the contrast in and of itself. I don't need the maror for that. So why is the maror at the Seder? I'm not saying I don't have to remember the slavery. Fine, I have Tisha B'Av, but why am I remembering it? Why is it so important to remember it at the Pesach Seder itself? So on this, the Maharal says an amazing and very, very important concept, which is we are often under the impression that what Pesach is about getting out of Egypt, meaning that the matzah is really the centerpiece of what Pesach is about, but it's really not true. Like what we said last week, and we said it again now, which is that what Pesach is really about is accepting and accepting Kadosh Baruch Hu as our ruler and entering into his service. That's what the Korban Pesach is all about. The Korban Pesach, which is the first act of avoda that the Jewish people did. As in an act of avoda, by doing avoda, they become avodim. We inaugurate ourselves into the service of Kadosh Baruch Hu through the Korban Pesach, and the Korban Pesach really is that connecting to Kadosh Baruch Hu as the king. The fact that we leave Egypt is not what Pesach is about. It's a consequence of what Pesach is about. Pesach is about adopting Kadosh Baruch Hu as the king. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu is our king, the Egyptians can no longer contain us. They can no longer hold us back. We get out. We're out of Egypt. It's interesting. There's a Rashi in Bamidbar by the mitzvah of tzitzis. He talks about the fact that there are 8 strings on the tzitzis. Says those 8 strings represent the 8 days from Yetzias Mitzrayim till Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, when we sang the shir before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everybody asked the obvious question, what do you mean the 8th day? There are only 7 days of Pesach. The Shvi Shel Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach, is when we celebrate Kriyas Yamsuf and the shir on the Yam. So what's Rashi talking about? What Rashi is talking about is that Yetzias Mitzrayim does not begin on the 15th of Nisan when we left. It begins on the 14th when we offer the Korban Pesach, when we shech the Korban Pesach, because that's the act by which we adopted HaKadosh Baruch Hu as our king, and at that moment we are officially free from Egypt. Being in Egypt is being the servant of Paro. Being out of Egypt in its most essential sense has nothing to do with our geographical location. It has to do with the fact that Paro is no longer a king, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our king. That is what Pesach is all about. The actual physical departure is a consequence of the fact that once HaKadosh Baruch Hu is my king, nothing can contain us. All the ideas of saying we got out so quickly and the matzah has to be so fast, and all the emphasis on that has to do with the fact that once the Kadosh Baruch Hu is the one who is leading us out of Egypt, nothing can stop us. Nothing can hold us back. Nothing can slow us down. That's the idea of matzah being a bread that has no time, because in a sense, getting out of Egypt so quickly is we got out without time there at all, because we essentially were touching something beyond the physical world through a connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and time no longer there was no longer a characteristic that we were connected to, and the Egyptians couldn't hold us back. But the point is the departure, what the matzah represents, getting out, becoming free in that sense of the word, not in that sense we were talking about before, that more essential sense of recognizing who I am, but getting out of Egypt, the physical experience of being free and getting out, that was a consequence of the Korban Pesach. Points out the Maharal, because of this, right, because that's what got us out. Basically what happened was, at that moment we offered that Korban Pesach, we were born as a nation, but we were born as a nation with a specific identity and purpose, which is the service of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? In that service of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have an identity. In the service of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have a basis for our existence. Outside of that service of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we don't. And says the Maharal, an inevitable consequence of the fact that we got out of Egypt through defining ourselves around the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, when we're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we will be free. But if we fall down in those responsibilities of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we lose our definition, our basis for existence. We necessarily slip back into Golus, into exile, into serving another king, into losing that actualized relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. In other words, basically as a consequence of the Korban Pesach and that definition of self that took place in Egypt, it means that our history will necessarily be a constant up and down of times when we're meeting our responsibilities, in which we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we have our freedom and we exist as an independent nation, and times when we'll fall down in those responsibilities, lose that connection, and fall into Golus. The reason why we eat the Pesach, we're supposed to eat the Korban Pesach with matzah and maror, is because both are equal consequences of the fact that we have that Korban Pesach is what Pesach is really all about. Basically, it's like you think of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a time when we crown HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are deep parallels between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah. That's not our topic now. But just like on Pesach, with the Korban Pesach, we recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the king. On Rosh Hashanah, on a different level, we're also recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the king. That is a day of judgment, because if we're making HaKadosh Baruch Hu a king, then at that moment he has to judge, is this nation a nation which is an adequate, vehicle for my expression to the world or not. So the inauguration of the king is always going to bring with it a time of judgment on that people. Is this a people that's fitting and capable of really serving and expressing the king? Pesach isn't a time of judgment, but Pesach means the fact that we've adopted Kadosh Baruch Hu as the king means necessarily we're going to have a life where judgment is going to be a part of the relationship. And in times when we are not adequately expressing and actualizing our side of the relationship, then necessarily that's going to bring with it a time of din and a time of judgment, and the kind of times we find ourselves in now. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it's worth noting it. You don't necessarily have to understand the judgment as meaning we did something wrong and therefore there must be judgment. It can also be that that judgment is pushing us to become more who we need to be in order to serve that role and in order to be that people that's capable of recognizing, actualizing God in the world. We spoke last week about it, and I mentioned it, I reviewed it a little bit in the beginning of what we're talking about tonight, that as we look for sort of what are we being pushed towards by this experience of being sort of crunched into these into a confined space with other people that we care about. It's a time which is both challenging, but it's also opportunity for developing what we were talking about before, of really appreciating the greatness of what is to be human, the greatness of, and you can see that most clearly once you get the stuff, all the stuff out of the way. That's something you can appreciate most deeply with people that you're close to and people that you care about. I mentioned last week, obviously, I'm lucky enough to be in quarantine with Mrs. Kagan. She has to deal with the fact that she's in quarantine with me. That's a different discussion. But in terms of, as time goes on, our ability to connect with Kadosh Baruch Hu is increasingly focused through our relationships with other people. We don't have prophecy anymore. We don't have revealed miracles anymore. We don't have a temple at this point for the avodah and the service there. We have Torah to deepen our appreciation and depth of ourselves. We have relationships with other people to be able to engage and recognize Tselem Elokim in the humanity that's in front of us. And effectively, what we understand is that this whole period of time, you have to understand it as a time of din. Again, thank God, relative to our historical experience, it's a soft din. Maybe it's the only kind of din that we're able to handle at this point, but it's still din. And what din means is that what's being put up in front of us is the responsibilities that we need to be developing more than what we have up until this time. And if there's any responsibility that we're being confronted with, it's in our relationships with the people that are right in front of us. There's actually a famous Rambam that talks about the fact that when our community experiences suffering, if we attribute it to a merely natural occurrence and don't take it as something that spurs us to developing that relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's actually cruelty, because we invite upon ourselves additional suffering. Suffering is when on a national, community level, and even more so on a national level. On a national level, we're being confronted with a situation like this. It's our obligation to recognize it as something which is speaking to us, highlighting for us someplace that, whether you want to talk about it as our lacks or just something that we need to, that you can look at the frame it positively, is something we need to develop further. It's as our, like the fact that this is causing the shuls to close. Everything about it is focusing us more in our living spaces and the people that we're living with. If there's anything to learn from that, I think there's nothing clearer than the fact that this is what we need to be working on. What destroyed by Sheni, the second temple, was seen as chinam. It all has to do with the social relations between one another. How does that destroy the temple? It's a social thing. Because the reality is that our ability to connect with something beyond the physical world, the fact that we recognize there is elokus that lies at the basis of reality itself, as time goes on, that becomes increasingly focused in our relationship with other people. That's the place where we can find this stuff. I think that's, I'm saying, I'm not saying this is not vortlach necessarily for your Pesach Seder. Certainly if you've got young children there, that's not going to be the focus. But in terms of our understanding of if we're looking for some way of understanding what is going on here, the world is going crazy, right? It's like my brother said, he feels like he's living through a science fiction novel. It's definitely a different kind of a world. We personally, none of us have experienced anything like this before, and it's been a very long time since the world itself has experienced something like this. Not unprecedented, but it's been a long time, certainly not in our personal experiences. It's something that's new. We need to recognize this as something that we need to be reacting to. We need to be internalizing this in terms of, how is this focusing who I am and what I'm trying to do. It's like it's a wake-up call to be understanding my life more in the context of my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and how my relationships both with myself and with other people are taking place in the context of an overall relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Can we open up to questions now? I'm going to call Mrs. Kagan in. Now that's all by means of introduction. Now you can all have what you're really waiting for is Mrs. Kagan to be able to ask her questions. So we're gonna bring her over here, and I'm gonna try and figure out how to unmute everybody.
Can you repeat that last sentence
I guess
that you
let's
said?
just let everybody unmute themselves. I'm gonna let Mrs. Kagan come over. Now just tell us if you're not hearing us again. Ms. Kagan, you want to say something so everybody can hear? So we can
I'm
see if
just
the
wondering
speaker's
if any questions, any comments, anything. Quiet?
helpful, not helpful.
Can you repeat that last sentence? Last sentence, Jer.
So everyone speaks to Mrs. Kagan. That's what everyone is waiting for. Not that one?
No. Oh, Hillary Block. Hi.
I don't know.
Here.
Rabbi Kagan, I think that you need to move closer to the microphone when you
I need
speak.
to move closer? Okay,
Yeah.
let's try that. Let's see if that's better.
Try to point it directly towards you if it's
Okay, I'm going to do
that
something
kind of microphone.
else. Is that better?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Great.
Fine.
No, some people are saying no.
Worse? Who's saying no? What are people saying? One more time. We should be able to get everything. Everybody?
Mrs. Kagan, can you try talking? Maybe you're in a better angle.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah, your voice
Better?
is coming in clear. Are you closer to it than Rabbi Kagan?
Okay.
We're gonna
get closer.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone's smiling.
Don't tell anybody you saw this, okay? I'm gonna switch to the gallery view.
Okay. What was your last sentence? Can you remember it?
I mean, I guess what I said is that when things become as extraordinary as they are, it's a wake-up call that, it's very easy to slip into a situation where we're living our little life day to day, and we do our little mitzvahs and we do our chasadim, and that's important, and I'm not saying that it's not, but the reality is much larger than that, that our whole lives are really taking place in the context of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and our relationships with other people are taking place with ourselves, we're living in God's world in the context of with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and it's very, very easy to fall asleep with that. When events become as extraordinary as are the ones that we're living through, where we really have that sense that a message is being delivered, and a wake-up call to be more cognizant. It's like the sukkah. The whole idea of the sukkah is you still lead your life, but you're under the schach, and that makes you constantly aware of the fact that you're living in God's world, and those relationships and everything else are part of that larger picture. And the kind of events that we're going through, which are really extraordinary, certainly for us, we're not used to this kind of this. Our parents, my parents, my mother went through the bombing in London. My parents lived through the Second World War. They've seen extraordinary world-shattering events before, but someone, a youngster like myself, who's in his early 20s, right, has not really seen anything like this, and this is something that's very, very new. But one of the things that I think that it's very useful as this kind of a wake-up call to remember that, the fact that we live in very ordered lives that seem to sort of march on without too many outside complications. When things get turned on their head like this, it's a wake-up call to the fact that that order is a very thin layer of reality. There's a much deeper reality that's all built on. Was that hearable?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
Hi,
Who's
Leora.
speaking?
Leora.
Hi, it's Leora.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Okay.
You've spoken a lot about the isolation factor of what's going on, but can you speak, like, especially for us in the New York area, we're encountering a lot of illness and also possibly death, and can you speak about that experience?
I think I'm going to leave that one for Mrs. Kagan. I mean, look, it's
Yeah.
that's I think where you see again you need to do much more clearly in that arena. It's relative to what could be. It's still we have to always remember that it remains a gentle Midas Hadin. We've seen times when Midas Hadin looks much more difficult than what we're facing, but it doesn't change the fact. That's why I was emphasizing, as much as I'm saying it's a light Midas Hadin, there are individuals that are experiencing this. It's not so light. And yeah, I mean, it is, again, it's
I think also what
it is Midas Hadin.
I think Leo would also, if I understand your question, it's also to watch it, to see what's going on, is to watch Midas Hadin is very painful. It's very painful.
I mean, again, this is something that we're not used to. We're very much, and the truth of the matter is the Rabbanan themselves talk about the switch between in the late 19th century. The main yeshiva in Europe was a place called Navardik, and the whole emphasis there was on sort of trying to tear down the ego and sort of break yourself down. I'm nothing. I'm nothing. I'm nothing. The old joke they tell about it is, a new recruit shows up at the yeshiva and it's Musar hour and everybody's is rocking over the desk saying, I'm nothing. I'm nothing. I'm nothing. He slips into a desk at the back and starts going back and forth saying, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. Guy at the front says, look who thinks he's nothing. Okay, fine. Anyway, but the bottom line is Navardik was the big yeshiva in Europe during the 19th century. And in the beginnings of the late 19th and the early 20th century, Slobodka suddenly came into the fore, and all the Gedolim of the post-war era, all of them came out of Slobodka, where the emphasis was just the opposite, which is building up, recognizing the greatness of what it is to be human. And it really represented a kind of a shift in a time when people had very, very strong sense of self. In order to have a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, you have to be able to break that down a little bit. But as we became weaker, really the ability to have a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu became much more on the emphasis on the greatness of what it is to be a person. And that shift was very much necessary. It's like and post Second World War, that's been very, very much the approach, is the Ahava side of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And thank God we've been in a period of time when that could very much be the focus. This is really, again, look, if you lived in Eretz Yisrael, it's not like death wasn't part of the picture also. But again, it was gentle in the sense that a time when Midas Hadin showed itself in an earlier generation, the magnitude was a completely different level. So yeah, it is Midas Hadin. You can't get away. And one of the things that I wanted to try and bring out in this presentation and sort of recognizing this aspect of Pesach, this is part of the picture, meaning that it's Midas Hadin means. We have a purpose, and purpose means responsibility. And for responsibility to be real, it means that there are consequences when that responsibility isn't filled. And that's really what Midas Hadin is synonymous with consequences, and consequences are only meaningful in the context of purpose. We have purpose. where the Jewish people, we lead humanity in developing this relationship of humanity with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We have a responsibility, and that means that there's purpose and there's consequences, and that's
And there's pain.
and there's pain. There is. It's part. It is part of the picture. I bless you all that it shouldn't be something in your lives, and we daven that we should get through this as quickly with as lightly as possible. But we are being called upon to do something, which is which
might be extraordinary.
Yeah,
but the possibility is of who we might become, and what might be some of the, I don't know, outcomes might be extraordinary.
Yeah,
but it's still painful.
You can't get away from the fact that it's part of the relationship, and kind of events in our life are a time when we're forced to have a reckoning with the fact that, again, but what it means is, the whole point is, life has a purpose, and that brings with it responsibility. I used to bring the example of, a parent gives a child a sum of money to get a college education. And the kid goes to college, and instead of going to class, buys a sports car, starts taking drugs, having a great time. The parents pull the plug. They take the bank account away. And the kid turns to the parent and says, "Look, you wanted me to be happy. This is what made me happy." And the parent says back, "It's not what we call happiness, and this is not what we gave you the money for. We don't accept this as defining and giving meaning to your life." And Kadosh Baruch Hu, the point of Midas Hadin is exactly that. Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us the opportunity of life in creation, and there's an expectation there. And one of the things that makes it so it may be disorienting is the fact that especially in this particular situation, where the din falls is very, in our eyes, random. Obviously, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not random, but it doesn't change the fact that the message to all of us, and it's not necessarily, and certainly not all of us, thank God, that's experiencing the sharpness of that Midas Hadin. But it's what the cheshbon is, what the calculations are that mean that it falls here and it doesn't fall there. That is totally beyond our comprehension. We don't have access to that anymore. If there was a prophet around, maybe, but even then it would only be a maybe, right? It's Tzadik Varalo is something which in the Torah itself is something which even Moshe Rabbeinu could not comprehend. So it's but again, that's what I'm saying. I talk about the bigger picture because that's the one that is understandable. That's the one where we can talk about what the principles that are at work. But it doesn't change the fact that you're right, 100%, Liora. There are individuals that are suffering in this in a completely different way, on a completely different order of magnitude. Who it is that goes through that and why it's them and not someone else is completely out of our. We don't have access to that.
Anyone else? You can unmute. Unmute.
I think someone has a question in the comments.
Okay.
We're being in the chat.
It didn't come up yet. Did it come up?
Okay.
Oh. Sarala, hi Sarala. Social aspect of what's going on. Yeah. No, you answer.
Okay, so let me read out the question. The question is
The social aspect of what's going on
in a society where yeah, that's true, but there are acts of kindness that you can do. That doesn't preclude your ability to do these acts of kindness. You're right. I can't do this. It doesn't mean that the phone call to your grandmother or something like that isn't something that's still very much available. Before the isolation came in, there were a lot of acts of kindness where people were buying and delivering groceries for older people. There was a lot of that going on. Very, very beautiful. Now those acts of kindness come in the form of phone calls. There was we were talking last week about technology and the limitations of technology. There are serious limitations of technology, but they also do give us this strange ability to be able to retain a level of social interaction in the face of this sort of physical isolation. And that's, I think those the ability to make those phone calls and making those phone calls still is very much it's very much a reality. It's like the ability to do chesed is still there. You're right. We can't do it physically, but the ability to do chesed is still there. And obviously, at this point, the physical chesed is going to be focused much more in the immediacy of the living space that you're in. That's the physical ones, but that showing that you care about somebody and making those phone calls or WhatsApps or Zooms or whatever it is, we're still very much capable of doing that. The social fabric has not broken down as a result of being broken into these sort of isolated units. It does stop a certain level of direct physical contact or physical interaction. But this is one of the strange things about this particular situation is we're both isolated. I mean, look at this. We're having this Zoom. I mean, what it took this thing to get us to get this Zoom alumni thing going. We are connecting, and that connecting is a beautiful and an important thing. I think, yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah. Who's speaking?
Alexandra.
Hi, Alexandra.
So I've noticed a challenge for myself is that like I've moved, back in with family and whatever, and how like having like being respectful while still maintaining boundaries. So let's say me and the people I'm like living with, we all have different anxieties about what's going on, and that anxiety tends to be a bit contagious, I'm realizing. Where it's like one person's like nervous about one aspect and another person's nervous about another aspect, and like how do you like maintain like respectful boundaries with this kind of like I feel like the anxiety is more contagious than the virus, honestly.
It can be. I mean, I guess the only thing I can say is that we each have our own anxieties about what's going on. And the anxieties can go anywhere from, being fearful of getting sick, or people that getting sick, or just being cooped up a lot, or not being able to do the things that you're used to doing. It can, and thinking about what's going to be in 2 days or in a week. I mean, everyone has an anxiety about something, and a lot of it is that we don't even know where it's coming from, but we're starting to act kind of weird, or getting upset or getting uptight or not sleeping or whatever it is. I think that the thing that really just to be aware of is that everyone has a different way of feeling their anxiety, and it affects them differently, and just to allow each person to have their own space with it. I think that's true with a lot of emotions. It's not just anxiety, it's also with happiness and with anything, any emotion. Each person has it to their own, has it for their own, has it aligned with their own temperament, their own experiences in life. And just to be understanding that like we're all under difficult circumstances right now. So, as much as we are trying to be the higher self and the best self we can be, and we really try that, and we're really working towards that, there are moments and times when we're just not, and to allow that in the people that we're with, and not to take it too personally, not to take it too seriously, not to just kind of let it go, because it's a hard situation. And everyone's dealing with it differently, and yeah. Did that answer it, Alexandra?
Can I add something speaking from the callous male rational perspective, which is that, if you can look on the internet and you can see a really quite a broad, array of reactions and recommendations of how to conduct ourselves and be safe For example, you can look at a video from a doctor who's telling you that, every item you bring in from the supermarket needs to be disinfected before you touch it, or it should be, 3 days in the garage so that any surface of the touch, the virus will hopefully be gone at that point. And that certainly is an approach, but you can find other places on the internet where you have, epidemiologists, real people who talk about the fact that, it's theoretically possible that that could be a vector of infection, but it's pretty small, and that we do need to balance our safety with our sanity. Meaning sometimes I don't want to quote Trump on this, but you don't want the cure worse than the disease. But what I would say is you don't want if your caution is making you crazy, then, and again, it's easy for me to say these things, but I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe as a group, since you are a unit in your apartment, you are a unit. And maybe what you need to do is you need to sit down and sort of define together what the level of caution is that you're going to be observing in the context of your apartment, so that everybody's sort of on the same team and you can sort of work together to kind of balance out the anxiety. Again, every caution you want to take, no one's going to tell you that you can't do that, or that that's not, but you do have to ask yourself the question, how do I balance my sanity with with my response to the situation, especially when, again, if you put it into the larger context in terms of it's an interesting thing. There's no question in my mind, in Eretz Yisrael, many more lives are being saved by this virus than are being lost, because everybody's off the roads. So this happened during the Gulf War also, that the mortality rate in Israel went down tremendously because people weren't driving so much, and the driving on the roads was more dangerous than anything that the war was bringing. And I think certainly at this point, I don't know what's going to be long term, but at this point, I think it's unquestionable more lives are being saved than the virus is taking by the fact that people are just being kept off the streets. I'm just saying that this thing is out there. It is a danger for your age group. The danger is fairly minimal. It's not so different really from that posed by the flu. Some people do die from the flu. It does happen on occasion, but you want to ask yourself this question, and I think you should work together as a group, saying what is the level that we want to define for ourselves in this social unit. You're a unit in the apartment, whether you like it or not. You are in contact with one another, and so whatever level of shmirah that you're taking does implicate everyone else in that apartment. You are a unit. I think it might be helpful to just sort of sit down and let's figure out together what we're going to do.
It's a little bit more complicated when you're living, let's say, in a family where there's different age groups in the family, or in an apartment where there's different age groups. So you really just have to sit down and talk about it and come up with something that's going to work for everyone, and be committed to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
a good, I mean, the first thing I would like to do is you have to
okay. Take it off.
you have to be very proactive about maintaining a social life through technology. Self-care is very, very important in this situation, and that encompasses many things. You want to make sure that you're getting enough sleep. You want to make sure that your system is strong in case you have to be fighting something off, that you're able to do it. Every other disease that ever exists still exists in the context of this virus. You can pick up anything else as much as the virus. Taking care of yourself, getting enough sleep, keep yourself strong. But also, your sanity is something that you need to be, whether it be whatever hobbies you want to be taking up, or you want to be focusing in on, or reading you want to be doing, or writing you want to be doing, instruments you want to be learning, languages you want, whatever it is. But also, if you're living by yourself and you're in like a quarantine situation, you need to be really proactive about creating some kind of a social net in the context of the isolation. Because if you're living by yourself, then you're used to a little bit more quiet personal time than someone who's living with other people. But you also you went out to work and you had your friends and you got together with them once
And
in a while.
Shabbos meals,
Shabbos, and
going
whatever
to
it is.
shul.
So a lot of the stuff is normally adds to social life that is right now. And really, any other aspect of self-care, be really proactive about making sure that you have a social life, even if it's built with technology in the context. I would say that for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Probably, I don't think probably a lot of
Rabbi Kagan, we can't hear you right
Can you
now.
hear me now? Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was saying I would also imagine that there's probably a lot of chesed opportunities coming up in terms of organizing phone calls to elderly and these kinds of things, which are surprised if those things aren't coming up. Kind of getting involved. That may be another involved with having a special aspect, to the life that you're leading.
They just advertised. We advertised just now on the WhatsApp for the girls this year and Shana Bet, if there's an adopt a savta, adopt a bubby kind of program, just to reach out to elderly. But again, if you're by yourself,
Anyone who adopt us, we're available.
if you are by yourself, then it's really important to just keep reaching out. First of all, to take really good care of yourself, and to recognize that you are missing a lot of the socializing and the connections that you used to have, and to try to, at least in the meantime, create them in a way so that you still have connections. Okay. Thoughts on how this time period compares to other worldwide tragic. You want to read that one?
Yeah. So, how this time period compares to other worldwide tragic I'm not like a big fan of this.
Rabbi Kagan, we can't hear you again.
How's
Yeah,
that?
maybe
Is that better?
I think if you place yourself more in center of the frame, that may be where the camera's microphone is
How about that?
aiming.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Okay, fine. So we'll move this around. Okay, so the question
Did everyone hear the question?
The question is, how do you?
Wait, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now, I couldn't hear what you were just saying. Couldn't hear
Okay. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
a drop better.
Can you hear me now?
Now you're good.
Okay, fine. So let's try this. I feel all right. So the question is basically like this: this is clearly like world shaking event. No question about that. There have been world shaking events at other points in time, and sometimes ones that were more directed specifically to the Jewish people. When there was a lot of talk about the fact that Mashiach was right around the corner. The answer is Mashiach is right around the corner, and he's always been right around the corner. And we have no idea how long it's going to take to turn that corner. If you look at discussed extensively in the Gemara in Heaven, I have to be learning this now with somebody. It's like we don't know. We don't know when. We don't know when Mashiach is going to come. And again, as I mentioned before, there is clearly a midas hadin coming into the world, but relative to what we've seen in the past, if you mention compared to, obviously the Holocaust was a completely different order of magnitude. Let alone if you're into epidemics, the Spanish influenza in 1918, which probably knocked out about 50 million people in a world with a lot less people than we have today. The bubonic plague is something that probably knocked out between 30 and 60% of the entire population of Europe. I mean, this is again, there are people who are suffering terribly in the present context. There are people that are dying from this thing. You cannot minimize that. But you're asking in terms of how this compares for other kinds of events. This is really not, it's just not the same order of magnitude. Regardless, we have no idea where we are in the historical process leading to Mashiach. We are definitely in the end game, but we have no idea how long that end game is. It's not productive to be trying to sort of predict, when he's coming or where we are in the whole. The Gemara lays out a number of different scenarios for what the structure of time looks like before the coming of Mashiach. We have no idea where we are in that process. I have no way of knowing it, and you're better off just sort of leaving leaving that consideration out of the picture. Yes, Mashiach is right around the corner, but we have no idea how big the corner is, and that's been true for 2,000 years.
Okay, I think that's it. Oh, Adele, are you there?
Can't hear. Just want to say thank you. Okay. Does anyone have some questions for the real wise person here, Mrs. Kagan? This is your chance. Like, real wisdom is in the room. Don't.
I think that's it. It's late. Okay.
Again next week.
If people want, we can do it again next week. If people want, we can do it again next week. Just be in touch and just be in touch if you want to do it again next Sunday. We can do it next Sunday also if you want.
Okay.
Thank you all for taking the time, and thank you, Mrs. Kagan, for being here to step on my foot. And
some things have not changed at Madrasa Tehillah. Okay.
Okay, ladies.
Oh, Chana Zitzman, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, ladies.
Please feel free to send an email if you have any questions.
Rivka,
Thank you so much.
Oh, Hannah. Oh, wow. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So good
Thank
to see
you.
everyone. Hi, Rivka. I didn't see Rivka.
Bye.
Avital. Who's there? Leah. Adele. Hi, Adele. Sarala.
Sarala, there she is.
Sarala. Oh,
Avital.
hi. Leah. There's Leah. Hi, Leah. Avital.
Oh, you guys can both do a little bit. And wow.
Hi, Mrs. Kagan. I just wanted to say thank you, and Rabbi Kagan.
Oh, it's good to see
It's
you.
Shira.
Wow.
I'm my sister. She's Avital, but
What? I was going to say, you're a Shira. Where's Avital?
I'm my sister's thing. But I just want to say thank you so much. It's so good to hear from you.
It's good to see you. Be well.
Yeah,
Keep
it's
well.
big physics to be able to see you guys. Hi, Leah's wife up there. Hi, Leah. Hi, Leora.
Oh, there she is. Hi,
There
Leah.
she is, yeah.
Oh.
The Nisanis are there together,
Together.
strengthening one another.
Wow.
Send me the name of the microphone you use. I might be able to help you figure out why you're having trouble with it.
I'm using a blue
Show it to us.
a blue snowball.
And
Blue snowball.
It has three.
I'll look into it for you. I'll look
Okay.
into it for you.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, that's Leah's chesed.
Yeah. I'll do what I can with the skills that I have.
Be well.
Thank
Good to
thank
see
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Can you see who was on it? Because we couldn't see everyone.
I wish I could.
There is
Okay.
someone.